Hi, I'm Cece and welcome back to my channel. So it's been a minute. I have not posted a video in all of 2022. Truthfully, I am just busy and I am not that good at balancing the commitments of life sometimes, and YouTube is the thing that often falls to the wayside. But one hobby I did get back into this year was reading, and I thought it would be fun to do a video ranking all the books I read this year. I have a feeling if you like my channel, we might have similar taste in books, and you might like some of these. Starting with my least favorite book I read this year, Dead Girls by Alice Bolin. I don't think this book was bad. I really think it was just advertised poorly and inaccurately, and it wasn't at all what I expected, which led to me being disappointed in it. The description on the cover says Essays on Surviving an American Obsession, and a portion of the description on the back says Alice Bolin examines iconic American works, illuminating the widespread obsession with women who are abused, killed, and disenfranchised, and whose bodies, dead and alive, are used as props to bolster men's stories. With 14 smart, accessible, thoughtful, and heartfelt essays, Bolin investigates the implications of our cultural fixations and her own role as a consumer and creator. I thought this was going to be essays focused on true crime and how the death and pain of women is sensationalized and glamorized and commodified. And that sounded really interesting to me, but this book was just not that. It was more of a collection of personal essays about the author's experiences moving to Los Angeles and dating and various other things, which I do love a personal essay, but I truthfully just didn't find these that compelling. The next book I read that I didn't really care for was Bunny by Mona Awad. You've probably seen this one on TikTok. That's where I saw it. And I'm a sucker for horror, thriller, books, movies, anything. So that's why I wanted to read this. This book is about a grad student at an elite university, and she gets sucked into this kind of cultish sorority at her university, which is a great premise, but I found the book itself disappointing. A lot of this book is kind of absurdist, and I also think it's satirical. It's partially commentary on the pretentiousness and cultishness of higher education and a lot of these elite institutions. How higher education can kind of just be a circle jerk, can I say that on YouTube? Of people congratulating themselves for being so smart. That aspect of it I did think was funny and clever, but honestly I think the book as a whole was just not what I wanted or expected. I wanted a scary horror thriller kind of book, and this was more of an absurdist, satirical, social commentary kind of book. So if you do decide to read it, I think just read it with that in mind. My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh. This book is about a young, privileged woman in New York City at the turn of the 21st century and her quest to basically sleep for a whole year. She is severely depressed, and she goes to this really sketchy psychiatrist who gives her basically a whole pharmacy's worth of pills. And so she spends a year just sleeping as much as she can and living off of her massive inheritance. I honestly think that this book was overhyped to me before I read it, and that's why I found myself a little disappointed in it. The main character is also completely unsympathetic, which I think is on purpose, but I did find the whole tone of the book just a little insufferable and pretentious. I think this is another one that's at least partially satire, like, I don't know, commentary on the plight of the overly privileged. But honestly, sometimes I find even that pretentious. Like, oh, this isn't a bad book, it's just satire. Who knows? Maybe some of the commentary went over my head, or maybe I just didn't like the book that much. Night Shift by Kiara Ladner. This one is, in broad strokes, about a woman who becomes obsessed with her coworker and basically rearranges her whole life to spend more time with her, and the fallout of that and how it affects her life and her other relationships. I liked this book. Like, I remember liking it as I was reading it. The reason I'm not ranking it higher is just because it was a little unmemorable to me. But it was a quick and entertaining read. I would recommend it. Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This book is written in documentary style, and it follows the lives and the story of a fictional, like, Fleetwood Mac-esque type of band throughout their careers and their personal lives. That's it. I don't think this book is too deep. But I thought putting it in documentary format was clever, and I did find it entertaining, so I would recommend. Orange is the New Black by Piper Kerman. As you probably know, this book was the basis for the Netflix series Orange is the New Black, and a lot of the show is fictionalized, but the premise is basically true to life. Piper Kerman, who was the Piper Chapman character, if you've seen the show, spent a year in prison for a decade-old drug charge, and she has since written this book and become an advocate for prison reform. I've been wanting to read this ever since I watched the show in like 2013 when it came out, and I did like it. I thought that it was well written and an interesting memoir. However, the only reason really that I'm not ranking it higher is I just found it a little insufferable at times. Like, I just found the overall tone of the book a little self-aggrandizing, which I think annoyed me. She's just so like, I'm a privileged white woman who doesn't belong here, and I'm going to help this poor woman write her essay to get her GRE, and I'm not going to let her pay me for it because I'm such a good person. I don't know. Not really, but I think her tone just irritated me. And I do understand this was rich coming from me, another privileged white woman who makes social commentary videos on YouTube. I don't know. What we hate in others is what we hate in ourselves. What can I say? I do want to give her credit, though, for being way ahead of her time in writing this. Like, I feel like now we're having much more mainstream conversations about the US prison system and criminal justice reform, but I think this was a pretty novel thing to be talking about 10 years ago when this book came out. And overall, I do recommend it. Perfume by Patrick Suskind. This was a gift and recommendation from my girlfriend, who was an English major, is a professional writer now, and it shows. It does feel like a book you read in English class. It's one of those books that is a little bit slower paced plot-wise, but you can tell there's a ton of symbolism and metaphors and stuff woven in. This book is set in 18th century France, and it's the story of a man who is gifted with an incredible sense of smell, so he becomes a perfumer, but he also goes on a killing spree after he becomes obsessed with the scent of a young girl that he encounters. I definitely finished this book and had to Google, like, major themes and symbolism of Perfume by Patrick Suskind, but I did enjoy it. Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. You may be familiar with this one because of the Hulu series with Joe Alwyn. This book is about a young woman who meets and becomes friends with a somewhat famous photographer and her actor husband. She eventually begins having an affair with the husband, and the book follows how the dynamics of their friend group unfold. This is the second Sally Rooney book I've read. I read Normal People last year. And I know that I'm like her exact target demographic, but I am not like a Sally Rooney stan. I think that she's a good writer. I feel like her books are just very slice of life, and it doesn't really feel like there's a beginning, middle, and an end to them, which I don't always love. I did like this one more than Normal People, but it's still not at the top of my list. The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides. This is another English class book. Also, look how pretty this copy of it is. I love it. It's about a middle-class suburban family, the Lisbons, whose daughters, one by one, die by suicide over the course of a year. If I were to analyze this book, as if in an English class, I would say it's about the objectification of women and the fetishization of female purity and the effect that that has on girls and young women. The Lisbon girls are very sheltered, and they're described as very innocent and childlike, but they're simultaneously lusted after by all of the neighborhood boys. The whole book is narrated by a neighbor boy of the Lisbons, and I think that's such an effective choice because the tone in which he talks about them is idolizing almost to the point of being dehumanizing, which I think really gets across the point of this book. They're seen and even portrayed in the book as these beautiful creatures to admire and to look at, but their needs and feelings are never really taken into account. I liked this one a lot. Again, I feel like it was a little bit slow moving at times, but it's a classic, and I think it's definitely worth a read. We Had to Remove This Post by Hannah Burvotz. This is about a woman who works as a content moderator for a social media platform and the various ways in which that job has traumatized her and affected her life. I really enjoyed this one. It's a quick read. I think I read it in one setting, but it is fast-paced and entertaining, and I think definitely worth a read. Tender as the Flesh by Augustina Bazterrica. This one takes place in a dystopian future in which a sickness has killed all the animals and livestock, so humans have started breeding and eating special meat, aka yikes. This book was good, but definitely disturbing. I think it will probably stick with me for a long time, and it certainly gets across the point it's trying to make, and I'm still heavily considering going vegan because of this book. Cringeworthy by Melissa Dahl. I read this book only because Natalie Wynn talked about it in one of her videos, but I ended up really liking it. It's a nonfiction book, and it's a deep dive into why we cringe at ourselves and at other people. As someone who cringes at myself and other people a lot, probably too much, I think that I am painfully self-aware and also feel embarrassment for other people too much. I found this book really interesting and kind of weirdly comforting. Greedy: Notes from a Bisexual Who Wants Too Much by Jen Winston. This is an essay collection about the author's personal journey with her identity and her sexuality. I think that's really all there is to say without giving too much away. But as someone who took a long time to figure out and accept that I was queer and to feel okay about that, I found it really relatable and enjoyable. And if you relate to that journey at all, I think you will also find it relatable. It's also just very funny and well written. I really loved it. The Tragedy of Heterosexuality by Jane Ward. I'll just read a little excerpt of the description inside the cover. In this provocative book, Jane Ward focuses on straight culture's misogyny paradox, wherein heterosexual masculinity is characterized by a love for women that is expressed within a culture that normalizes men's hatred of women. Why do straight women participate in this culture? Ward suggests that it is partly because the respectability that straight women are afforded gives them power, and partly because they have been taught that women's self-sacrifice is both inevitable and romantic. This one is very academic, but it's basically a deep dive into how the traditional dynamics of heterosexual relationships don't really work for anyone, and yet they're kind of just accepted and forced on us. I found this book fascinating because, having dated men in the past and now dating a woman, I can confidently say there is a lot more room in queer relationships to figure out what roles and dynamics genuinely work for you and your partner, and to not just sort of default into these arbitrary dynamics and gender roles that are prescribed for us that actually really suck a lot of the time. So this was very interesting, very thought-provoking. Verity by Colleen Hoover. I feel like everyone has at least heard of this book. It's about a writer who is hired to ghostwrite for a famous writer who's been incapacitated in an accident. She is staying at the house of this writer and her husband, and weird things keep happening, and the story just kind of unfolds from there. This is not winning any Pulitzers by any means, but I thought that it was fast-paced and entertaining. I'm trying really hard to fight the idea that everything I consume has to be high quality or educational in some way, and I think that this is a really good junk food read. A very good vacation or plane ride read if you're just looking for something easy and quick-paced and entertaining. Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead by Emily Austin. This one is about a mentally ill lesbian, relatable, who ends up undercover working at a Catholic church. It deals a lot with themes of mental illness and dark spiraling thoughts, and I unfortunately found it extremely relatable. And I thought the writing was clever and funny, and I really liked it. I was a little disappointed in the ending. It felt to me a little bit rushed and a little bit too neatly tied up in a bow, but overall a really good and quick read. Nickel and Dimed by Barbara Ehrenreich. This is a memoir about a woman who goes undercover and she tries to live on minimum wage in several different cities in the US and chronicles her experience. Spoiler, she did this experiment in 1999 and she was not really able to do it. I first read this book in my high school sociology class 9 years ago. Honestly, shout out to Mr. Harris for assigning this to us in my very small town conservative high school. And then this past year, I found it in one of those little free library things in my neighborhood and decided to pick it up and read it again. It was really interesting to read this again from the perspective of an adult with another decade of knowledge and life experience. I just didn't know anything about anything at 17. Like, I was like, wow, minimum wage isn't livable? That's crazy. This book could have easily been a dry recounting of this social experiment, but it's not at all. Her writing is really compelling, and she talks not only about her own experience doing this experiment, but also about the people she works with and befriends and their personal lives and their circumstances, and I really just think everyone should read this book. Reading this again was also depressing because things have only gotten worse. Inflation has only gotten worse, and minimum wage has not kept up, and yeah, we need to do better in this country. And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This was the first Agatha Christie book I've ever read, and I thought it would be an English class book, and honestly it kind of was, but I also couldn't put it down. I don't want to say too much and give anything away, but this is just like a really classic campy mystery novel, and I loved it so much. The mystery is solved and everything is laid out and explained in detail at the end, which I also love. I think it's aged so well because Agatha Christie was doing all these mystery tropes before they were cliche. Like, she kind of created them. If you were into books like Nancy Drew and Series of Unfortunate Events as a kid, I think you would really like this. Also, if you liked the movie Knives Out, because this is exactly the genre and type of book that Knives Out is satirizing. Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. When I first got this book, I thought it was like, detransition, baby. And it's not. It's like, detransition, then a baby. I love this book so much. It is about a trans woman who detransitions, ends up with an accidental pregnancy with their new partner, and ends up considering raising this baby with their new partner and also their former partner who always wanted a baby. I just found this story so sweet and so beautifully written, and it's a great portrayal of the complexities of relationships and kind of pushing the bounds of what a family can look like, and it made me cry several times, and I loved it so much. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I have seen this book shit on so much all over the internet, and I am convinced that it's just popularity backlash because I loved it. It's about two fictional, super famous actresses in the mid-20th century, like the equivalent of Katharine Hepburn and Marilyn Monroe, who are secretly in a romantic relationship, and it follows their relationship over the course of decades and their various efforts to hide it because they have to, because of the time they live in and how high profile they both are. The ending had me crying and shaking. I know I don't need to defend me liking this book, but as someone who is trying to actively unlearn being not like other girls and avoiding things just because they're popular, I decided to read this even though it's all over TikTok, and I'm very glad I did. Walk Two Moons by Sharon Creech. I will preface with, this can probably be considered a children's book, young adult at best, but it is one of my favorite books of all time. I first read this when I was probably 10, and then again when I was 15, and then again this year, and I have absolutely loved it every time, and I feel like gotten something different out of it every time. It's about a girl who travels cross country with her grandparents to find her missing mother, and in parallel she's telling the story of one of her friends and her relationship with her own mother. It's told from the granddaughter's perspective, and it's just really beautiful and makes me cry every time I read it. Like, I have such a distinct childhood memory of reading this at my grandparents' house late one night and just sobbing into the book. Very good. Highly recommend if you haven't read it. The New York Times Modern Love Tiny Love Stories. Another book that made me cry. Shocking, I know. I read this in a single morning and I sobbed through the entire thing. This book is a spin-off project of the New York Times Modern Love column, which, if you don't know, is reader-submitted true stories about love and relationships. Fun fact, I've actually been published in that column before. Brownie points if you can find it. So this book is a collection of love stories that are written in 100 words or less, and they are all just so unique and beautiful and poignantly written. But yeah, if you want something that's a quick and touching read, if you're in the mood for a good cry, this is definitely it. And lastly, my favorite book I read this year, My Body by Emily Ratajkowski. I love this book so much. Emrata is obviously in the middle of a rebrand of like, I'm not just a hot girl, I'm also smart, with her book, her podcast. And I know a lot of people have feelings about that. That being said, she is really smart and she's a fantastic writer. It's a collection of personal essays about her journey of how she relates to her own body and sexuality and using her body to make money as a model, and how she reconciles that with her feminism, wrestling with whether or not that is in fact an empowering feminist thing to do. I honestly didn't expect to love this book so much or to find it relatable because I am not like a millionaire supermodel, but I think she's a fantastic writer, and I think so much of what she talks about can be relatable to any woman, and I love this book so much. I really recommend it. An honorable mention to Little Fires Everywhere. I'm about this far through this one, so it's not included in my ranking, but I do really like it so far. Give you a full review when I finish it. And that is it. If you are still watching, if you're still here to watch at all after I haven't posted in a year and a half, thank you. I really, really do miss making videos, and I plan on getting back to putting out content more regularly in the new year. We'll see how regular is regular. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe and follow me on socials if you don't already. But yeah, thank you for watching and happy holidays, and I'll see you all soon.